While Josh is away, the team will play. We finally cracked open Asus's ROG Xbox Ally like kids on Christmas, and we couldn't wait to start testing it out. In one of the big ads for the new ROG Xbox Ally, it said, "This is an Xbox." They're differentiating it from the prior generation from 2 years ago, which was not Xbox branded, and the chassis has changed. Since Tony, one of our video editors, is an Xbox and PC gamer, he was the most eager to try it. Having an Xbox in the palm of your hand sounds too good to be true. As for me, I'm coming from a desktop and a Steam Deck at home, so I was also curious if this could be a better alternative for playing games on the couch. The main reason this device is so compelling is that you have access to a much larger game library, since it runs actual Windows instead of Linux. There is also an Xbox interface where you can access all your apps and games in one place, so you should be able to launch everything seamlessly. In theory. We value your time, so we'll let you know upfront that the Ally is certainly not an Xbox, as the experience is not anywhere close to that. The whole Xbox interface often switches you over to regular Windows depending on what game you're playing, and the user experience just feels like it's still in beta. You are getting access to a larger library than the Steam Deck, for sure, but if you want to play modern titles at higher settings, a handheld is the wrong way to go. These simply don't perform as well as a laptop or a traditional console, and you're making a lot of sacrifices for the additional portability. It really feels like this Ally was taken out of the oven half-baked. We've heard great things about the X version as far as performance goes, and if you're cool with the OS quirks, that might be a good pick for you. But like most reviewers, we really don't see the point of this base model Ally. The first major pitfall it falls into is using an older CPU technology. Just like the Steam Deck, which is 3 years old by the way, it uses a 4-core Zen 2 chip with 8 threads and 8 RDNA 2 GPU cores. The Ally CPU is clocked higher than the Steam Deck at 3.8 GHz instead of 3.5, and allows for a higher TDP up from 15 to 20. For reference, the Ally X uses a Zen 5 chip with RDNA 3.5 GPU cores, a major upgrade in every way. Now, how did it feel to actually play on it? For that, we asked Tony to take it home over the long holiday weekend and have some fun with it.
Over the weekend, I downloaded and played a number of my favorite games, some old and some new. Some games played well, some games played just okay, and some games played like straight up garbage. I will first start out by saying this. When Asus states that it can run AAA titles, they aren't making that up. It will run them, but whether or not they are enjoyable to play is up for debate. Let's start with the good. Low-spec games ran well, as expected. And these games are where I spent a majority of my time with the Ally. Hades 2, Balatro, Clover Pit, Portal, Coin Game, and the game I ended up playing the most, Fallout New Vegas, all ran really well. If those games didn't run well though, we'd have bigger problems. Some titles that worked surprisingly well though were Forza Horizon 5, Minecraft, Grand Theft Auto 5, and Elden Ring, albeit on the lowest possible settings, so gamers beware. A side note, most of these games also maxed out the CPU and GPU at 100% while gaming. Now, the category I presume most modern games on the Ally will live in is the just okay category. Skate, for example, runs just okay. It feels laggy and slow at times, plus it's capped at 30 frames per second. Two other games I will lump together in this category are Fortnite and Battlefield 6. They run okay, but they are much less enjoyable on a handheld. The display is small, meaning it's hard to make out what is happening on screen before it's too late. Now, does this mean that these games can't be played on the ROG Ally? Of course not. It's just a very frustrating transition if you are coming from an Xbox or laptop. Finally, the games that ran like absolute garbage. Monster Hunter Wilds and Riders Republic were unplayable. Even on the lowest setting, Monster Hunter Wilds averaged about 27 frames per second with lows at about 13 frames per second. That's pretty much unplayable. Not only that, but it took over an hour to compile the shaders just to run the game, and at that point, I didn't want to play it anymore. Riders Republic looked okay, but the inputs were about a full second late, rendering the game completely unplayable. I think a lot of the issues come down to how weak this hardware is. Even if a modern game is well optimized, it may still not run very well on this APU. The most enjoyable games were either old games or games designed specifically for low-spec handheld machines like the Ally or the Steam Deck. Now, let's talk about how it actually feels to use the Ally. The chassis looks very nice. It has a fun white aesthetic with RGB around the analog sticks that looks really cool. It also has angled grips now, which makes it more comfortable to hold than the prior generation Ally or the Steam Deck. This makes it nice to play on when sitting, or even standing if you're into that, I guess. But when you lay back on something like a recliner, your arms may fall asleep due to the awkward angle. This is probably one of the most common use cases for these handhelds, and gaming becomes a lot more difficult without the use of your fingers. On top of that, it feels a bit cheap and plasticky when you hold it. Plus, with the white colors and the intricate texture on the grips, it gets very dirty very fast, and can be difficult to clean. It picks up dirt, oils, and Dorito dust from your hands and gets in the small crevices. Another negative is the default settings on the analog sticks. The built-in dead zones are way too large. This means that you have to move the stick more for the inputs to read in-game. A smaller dead zone allows you to move it less. It feels difficult to be precise at the default settings, especially in FPS games or games that require small, exact movements. The issue was mostly fixed by adjusting the dead zone settings in Armory Crate, but someone who is coming from a console might not know how to tweak those settings, or, more likely, they simply don't want to mess with it. Next, this is definitely a personal thing, but it just feels like my hands are a little too big for the Ally. The grips were certainly a nice add, but I find my fingers scrunching up on the backside. This is definitely something I had to get used to. Sierra, on the other hand, pun intended, who has smaller hands than me, did not have this issue at all. Outside of the ergonomics, the ROG Ally, it stays very cool to the touch where your hands are, and the fan is incredibly quiet, even when gaming in turbo mode. This is something it has over the Steam Deck, whose fans can ramp up quite a bit in more demanding titles. Now, let's talk display. Both the ROG Ally and the ROG Ally X sport the same 7-inch HD IPS display with a max brightness of around 500 nits, which I must admit, look pretty good. It looks good in both dimmer and brighter environments, especially with its auto brightness feature. Its high-resolution 7-inch screen also makes content look nice and crisp. Its max refresh rate of 120Hz makes moving content look smooth as well. Gameplay always felt seamless as long as the game could run at a high enough FPS, which was definitely a problem. My main issue with the display, once again, comes down to how big my hands are. Most things I need to click on the Ally's touchscreen are pretty small. I find myself misclicking things all the time with my big fat fingers. And if I'm using the Windows functionality, forget about it. This could be fixed with the use of a stylus, but using a stylus is so 2008, you might as well just be using a Palm Trio. Anyway, even after messing with the Windows scaling, the Windows mode was never very easy to use via the touchscreen. This is something the Steam Deck excels at with its built-in big picture mode and the built-in trackpad. When it comes to the Xbox and Windows interface, it's just not there yet. The software experience doesn't feel polished. If you are an Xbox gamer and you're expecting to be able to take this out of the package and have an Xbox experience, that's not really the case. It feels like this version of Windows is still in beta. Text was often too small, the keyboard often wouldn't pull up when needed, application and launchers were also finicky. Almost everything we needed to do required a Google search to find a Reddit post or a YouTube video detailing how to change that setting, or pull the keyboard up, or do pretty much anything. There are some positives, like the fact that the Xbox Game Bar lets you switch from app to app very easily. And I like that you can enter the ROG Command Center with the tap of a button. There you can change the volume, the brightness, a bunch of other stuff. Unfortunately, the negatives kinda outweigh the positives. For example, downloading games. It would sometimes download a game while the Ally was in sleep mode, and sometimes it would pause the download. It was very inconsistent. This seemed to have depended on which game launcher we were using. Steam worked fine in sleep mode, but Xbox didn't. This is the opposite of what we expected. Games also do not download when the system is off. This makes sense, but it may throw off an Xbox gamer, where the game will still download while the system is powered down. Yes, I know the Xbox technically goes into sleep mode for this, but I think it'll trip people up that the handheld doesn't do that. This is another thing the Steam Deck just gets right. The download settings are very clear. Do you want your games to download in sleep mode? Do you want them to finish downloading before turning off completely? It allows for a simple yes or no in the power settings, and it's very easy to toggle on and off. Back on the Ally, the buggiest process by far was launching Steam games from the Xbox launcher. I would attempt to launch a Steam game from the Xbox launcher so that I could use the same interface. Then, it would jump between Steam and Xbox a number of times before even launching the game. And sometimes, it wouldn't even launch the game at all. Also, if you're trying to launch a game from other apps like EA or Epic Games, good luck. Basically, you have to consistently switch between a full-on Windows experience and the Xbox wrapper designed around it. If you're using the Windows mode and or a launcher that requires Windows mode, switching back to the full-screen Xbox mode will prompt you to restart the device for the most optimized experience. This can be annoying if you have an unsaved game in the Xbox mode and you have to restart the device just for the most optimized experience. This gets annoying after a while because you never know which one you're going to get. Steam and Epic's apps worked great once they were launched from the Xbox menu, but EA was a nightmare. Now, another annoying bug I experienced was while I was writing the script. I locked the Ally to write a section, went back to play the game, and the game got stuck in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. The only way to close it was to reboot the entire system. Then, I lost my saved game in Fallout New Vegas. My take is this. I think the ROG Ally is an acceptable gaming device for someone who plays low performance or older games, and is okay with sacrificing some performance in AAA titles when gaming on the go. For me, it turns out that most of the games I enjoy are simple enough to run pretty well on the ROG Ally. So, if the software wasn't so finicky, I think that this could be a decent purchase for myself for gaming while traveling. But while gaming at home, I see myself still booting up my Xbox or my PC. I'm going to hand it back to Sierra to go over some of the things I missed and close us out. Take us away, Sierra.
Thanks, Tony. Something I was hoping to see an improvement on coming from a 3-year-old device was battery life, and I do think Asus have achieved that. The new Ally lasts about 2 hours on battery playing a game at low settings at 200 nits brightness. That's pretty impressive. The Steam Deck isn't Windows, so we couldn't test it as accurately. Instead, we ran the same game on a loop until it died at what we approximated to be 200 nits, and it lasted about an hour and a half. For speakers, we felt the Ally sounded much fuller and more immersive, although both devices have front-facing speakers in nearly the same spot, which means sound is always facing you. The Ally also got a bit louder than the Steam Deck. The question I was the most curious about, though, was whether or not this is better than a Steam Deck, which costs nearly the same amount for similar specs. We have the LCD version here because that's the one I own personally, but the chip in the LCD and OLED version are very similar. These specs are also similar to the base model Ally, as stated earlier. So, how do these perform in actual games? Well, the screen actually plays a pretty big role here. The Ally has a 1920 by 1080 screen. Both versions of the Steam Deck have a 1280 by 800 screen. This means they can achieve higher FPS because their screens are slightly lower resolution than the HD one in the Ally. At such a short viewing distance, you may think this matters, but we felt the difference was minimal. The resolution doesn't have as much of an impact as FPS, which the Steam Deck wins in. You can see that here in the FPS being higher on the Steam Deck in 3 different games. Normally, we try to match resolutions for a fair comparison, but that sort of defeats the point on devices like this. People are rarely using them at a resolution other than native. However, my biggest gripe with the Ally is that it just isn't as easy to use as the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck's big picture mode makes it feel like I'm launching a console interface far more than the Xbox one on the Ally. Also, for the same price as the Ally, you get a much brighter OLED panel on the Steam Deck, and it's larger. The performance isn't great, but it's slightly better than the Ally. We were just very disappointed by this device. We had pretty high hopes for it. So, here's our suggestion. If you have $1,000 to spend on a handheld, the Ally X definitely sounds better than the Ally. Better performance for sure, but you are still buying a product with an unpolished interface. If you just want a handheld gaming experience and you don't care which games you have access to, like Josh mentioned to us during this review, the Switch 2 is going to be your best option by a long shot, much more premium and polished in every way. If you are a PC gamer and you're on a smaller budget, we'd probably recommend the Steam Deck OLED over the base model Ally as long as all your games are compatible. I think I'll be sticking with my Steam Deck for now until these devices are a little more mature, but as someone who loves gaming on the couch or while traveling, I am very excited to see this market grow stronger. Thanks for hanging out with Tony and I while Josh is out. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, and I hope y'all have a wonderful rest of your day.